They say a woman who has stopped crying has already started building. Imogen Hartley wasn't the kind of woman anyone expected to walk away quietly, but by the time her husband figured out what was happening, she'd already left the building behind her, brick by brick, and there was nothing he could do but stand in the wreckage of his own arrogance. The clock on the dashboard read 4:47 a.m. when Theo Hartley pulled his Audi into the driveway of the house on Larkspur Lane, the engine ticking as it cooled in the damp Charlotte air. He sat there for a moment, running a hand through his hair, smelling the faint trace of someone else's perfume on his collar, something sweet and synthetic, like a department store sample sprayed too liberally. He told Imogen he was in Atlanta for a logistics conference. 3 nights. A keynote dinner, a breakout session on supply chain resilience, a hotel bar where conveniently his phone had died and he hadn't been able to call. The truth was simpler and uglier. He'd spent those 3 nights 20 minutes from his own house, in a rented condo that belonged to a 26-year-old marketing associate named Brielle Calloway, who worked 2 floors below him at Meridian Freight Solutions. He grabbed his garment bag from the back seat, rehearsing the tired smile he always wore when he walked back into domestic life. He pictured Imogen upstairs, maybe already awake with their daughter, Wren, who was 11 weeks old and still didn't sleep through the night. He pictured himself saying something charming, something about how exhausting business travel was, how he'd missed them both so much, how he needed coffee and a shower and his own bed. He had done this enough times now that the lie had a rhythm to it, almost a melody, and Theo had started to believe his own performance. He walked up the brick path toward the front door of the house he had bought 4 years ago, back when his consulting firm landed the Cargill account, and he'd finally felt like a man who'd arrived somewhere. The porch light was off. That was the first wrong thing. Imogen always left it on for him, an old habit from when they were newly married and broke, living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Raleigh, where the hallway lights flickered, and she didn't like him walking up in the dark. He slid his key into the lock. It didn't turn. He frowned, jiggled it the way men do when they refuse to believe a simple mechanical fact, then pulled it out and checked it under the dim porch light to make sure it was the right key. It was. He tried again. Nothing. A small, irritated heat rose in his chest. Had she changed the locks because he'd missed Wren's 2-month checkup last week? That seemed dramatic, even for Imogen, who he privately thought of as sensitive, when she brought up things like his absences, his late nights, the way he flinched whenever she touched his phone. He moved around the side of the house toward the garage, intending to let himself in through the mudroom, and that was when he saw it. A wooden post jutting up from the lawn near the mailbox, one that hadn't been there yesterday morning. A red banner slashed diagonally across a white sign, Solge. Theo stood very still. He told himself it was a mistake, a neighbor's sign blown into his yard by the wind, some kind of prank. He walked across the wet grass in his leather loafers, feeling the dampness soak through to his socks, and put his hand flat against the signs as though touching it might make it disappear. It didn't disappear. The wood was cold and solid and real. Panic arrived all at once, a cold current up his spine. He ran to the bay window of the living room and cupped his hands against the glass, pressing his face close enough to fog it with his breath. Inside, the room was empty. Not messy empty, not in the middle of something empty. Stripped. The gray sectional Imogen had spent 3 months picking out, gone. The reclaimed wood coffee table from their honeymoon trip to Asheville, gone. Even the curtain rods had been taken down, leaving 2 rows of small dark holes in the drywall like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence he hadn't read yet. Imogen? His voice cracked, thin and unfamiliar to his own ears. He ran to the back of the house, found the kitchen door locked as well, and without thinking, without considering, even for a second, the consequences of what he was about to do, he picked up a decorative garden rock from the flower bed and hurled it through the glass pane of the French doors. The sound shattered the pre-dawn silence of the cul-de-sac like a gunshot. He didn't care. He reached through the broken pane, fumbled with the lock, and stumbled inside. The kitchen, usually cluttered with bottle warmers and burp cloths, and the herbal tea Imogen drank to help with milk supply, had been wiped down to bare counters. The refrigerator door hung open an inch, the light off, the shelves empty except for a single box of baking soda. He ran for the stairs, his dress shoes slipping on the hardwood, his heart slamming so hard he could feel it in his throat. Imogen, Wren. The master bedroom was a shell. The bed frame was gone. The walk-in closet stood open, the racks bare except for a few wire hangers swaying gently from the draft of the broken door downstairs. His suits, his watches, his shoes, all of it had vanished as cleanly as if he had never owned them. But the real horror was waiting in the nursery. He pushed open the door to the small room. They'd painted a soft buttercream yellow back in March, when Imogen was 7 months along, and still humming to herself while she rolled the trim with a paintbrush. The crib was gone. The glider chair where she'd nursed Ren at 2 in the morning, gone. The changing table, the diaper pail, the mobile shaped like little paper cranes that spun lazily whenever the air conditioning kicked on. All of it gone, as though the room itself had been erased. In the middle of the empty carpet sat one object, a manila folder. Theo's legs felt unsteady as he crossed the room and knelt to pick it up. Inside was a printed log of phone records, calls and texts spanning the last 5 months, dozens of entries highlighted in fluorescent yellow, all leading to one number he recognized instantly because he'd saved it under a fake contact name, Conference Room B. Brielle Calloway's number. Clipped to the top of the stack was a single handwritten note in Imogen's neat, looping script. You weren't in Atlanta, Theo. You were never in Atlanta. The house is sold. The accounts are settled. The locks chick. Don't come looking for us. You spent 5 months looking at her and didn't notice I was watching everything. He dropped the folder. The papers fanned out across the bare carpet like a losing hand of cards. The silence of the house, which moments ago had felt like an absence, now felt like a verdict. He pulled out his phone and dialed Imogen. The number you have reached is no longer in service. He dialed the house line out of pure reflex before remembering there was no house line anymore. Not really, not in any sense that mattered. Finally, with hands that wouldn't quite stop shaking, he called his attorney, a man named Walter Greaves, who had handled the firm's contracts for a decade, and who Theo had always assumed, with the casual entitlement of a man who'd never needed anything from him personally, would also be in his corner if it ever came to this. Walter picked up on the 4th ring, his voice thick with sleep. Theo, it's not even 5 in the morning. Walter, where is my wife? Where is my daughter? The house is empty. There's a sold sign in the yard. I think someone broke in. Nobody broke in, Theo. Walter's voice had changed, the warmth gone out of it entirely, replaced by something flat and careful, the tone of a man reading from a script he'd rehearsed. Imogen triggered the clause. What clause? What are you talking about? The postnuptial agreement. You signed it 2 years ago, when the firm restructured and we needed to ring-fence the business assets. Section 9. The fidelity clause. That was boilerplate. That was legal language, Walter. Nobody actually thinks. It was a binding contract, and you read it before you signed it, or at least you should have. Proof of infidelity triggers immediate transfer of marital property to the custodial parent, effective on filing. She sent documentation to my office 2 days ago. Photographs, a hotel reservation under Ms. Calloway's name with your card on file. Text messages, it's airtight, Theo, I drafted it myself, I can't fight it. I no longer represent you in this matter. As a matter of fact, there's a conflict since I represent the trust, and the trust is hers now. The trust? Walter, you've known me for 10 years. I've known your father-in-law for 20, Walter said. And there was something almost like pity in his voice now, which was somehow worse than anger would have been. Don't come to the house. Don't try to contact Imogen or the baby without going through proper counsel. She has a restraining order drafted and ready to file if you do. I'm sorry, Theo. I really am. Goodbye. The line went dead. Theo stood in the gutted nursery as the first gray light of morning crept through the bare window. And for the first time since he was a teenager, he felt the specific, suffocating terror of having absolutely nothing solid beneath his feet. To understand how a woman dismantles an entire household in under 14 hours, you first have to understand who Imogen Hartley actually was, underneath the persona of supportive wife that Theo had grown so comfortable taking for granted. Before Ren, before the wedding, before any of it, Imogen had spent 6 years as a forensic accountant for a regional bank, the kind of job that taught her to read a balance sheet the way other people read body language, to notice the small inconsistency, the transaction that didn't quite belong, the pattern hiding inside what looked, on the surface, like order. She had given up the job when she got pregnant, partly because Theo wanted her home and partly because she told herself she wanted that too. But the instincts didn't leave her just because the job title did. It started 7 months earlier with a receipt. She'd been doing laundry, an ordinary Tuesday, nothing dramatic about it, and found a folded slip of paper in the pocket of Theo's gray suit jacket. Not a hotel receipt, not yet. A jewelry receipt, from a boutique downtown, for a pair of diamond stud earrings that had never once appeared on her own ears, in a box she had never once seen in the house. She didn't scream. She didn't confront him in the kitchen with the receipt clutched in her fist like women did in the movies. She felt something colder than anger settle into her chest, something almost clinical, the same feeling she used to get at work when a number didn't reconcile, and she knew, before she'd even finished the audit trail, exactly where the discrepancy was going to lead. She folded the receipt and put it back exactly where she'd found it. smoothing the crease the way it had been before. That night she made him dinner. His favorite, shrimp and grits with the andouille he liked, and listened to him complain about a difficult client, and smiled, and kissed him goodnight, and lay awake beside him for 3 hours after his breathings slowed into sleep, doing math in her head. The investigation that followed wasn't dramatic, either. It was patient, almost administrative. She knew Theo's passcode because he was, despite everything else, a creature of habit who'd used the same 4 digits, his college graduation year. Since she'd known him, she didn't confront the texts the first night she found them. She photographed them, methodically, page by page, the way she used to photograph evidence of fraud for compliance reports, and emailed them to a private account Theo didn't know existed. She found Brielle's name within a week. She found the condo within 3. She found, eventually, the full shape of it. 5 months of lies stacked carefully on top of each other, each one small enough that she'd been able to talk herself out of noticing, until the pile of them together formed something undeniable. She didn't tell her mother. She didn't tell her sister. She told exactly one person, her father's old college roommate, a semi-retired family law attorney named Walter Greaves, who'd known Imogen since she was a child, and who, when she sat across from him in his mahogany-paneled office, with Wren asleep in her car seat between them, had looked at her for a long moment before saying, "If we do this, Imogen, it has to be complete. No half measures. If you leave him a single opening, a man like that will talk his way back through it. You understand that? I don't want to ruin him," Imogen had said, resting one hand on her stomach out of old habit, though Wren had already been born by then and was sleeping soundly 4 feet away. "I want him to understand finally that he can't have everything and lose nothing." The postnuptial agreement, it turned out, had been drafted years earlier, back when Theo's consulting firm was restructuring and his own father had insisted on protecting the business from what he'd vaguely called future complications. Theo had signed it without reading past the executive summary, laughing, telling Imogen it was just paperwork, utterly confident he would never be on the wrong end of a clause he hadn't bothered to understand. Section 9 sat there quietly for 2 years, waiting. Once Imogen had what she needed, the planning took 4 more months. She moved her grandmother's jewelry and a handful of family photographs to a storage unit under the guise of decluttering before the baby came. She quietly transferred her own savings, along with a small inheritance from her grandfather, into an irrevocable trust naming Wren as sole beneficiary, structured so Theo could never touch it regardless of what happened in any divorce proceeding. She found a real estate agent 2 towns over who specialized in discreet, off-market sales to relocating tech employees, and listed the house as a pocket listing without a single sign on the lawn. Not until the very end, she watched Theo's travel calendar the way she used to watch suspicious account activity, waiting for the right window. It opened when he announced a 3-day logistics conference in Atlanta, a trip she'd already confirmed through a contact at his firm, that didn't exist on any official calendar. The moment his Audi turned out of the cul-de-sac, that Tuesday morning, 3 moving trucks pulled in from the opposite direction. Imogen stood in the driveway in jeans and an old college sweatshirt, hair pulled back, directing the movers with the calm precision of someone running a logistics operation rather than dismantling a marriage. Living room to truck 1. Nursery to truck 2. Everything in his home office goes straight to the dump. Don't even bring it inside the truck. She'd hired a liquidation company to take the furniture she didn't want, all of it gone by early afternoon. The house closed on a cash buyer, a software executive relocating from California. At 2 o'clock that same day, the papers signed electronically while the last moving truck was still pulling out of the driveway. By 6, the house was an empty shell. By 8, Imogen was at a small private airfield 2 counties over, Wren asleep in a car seat beside her, waiting for a charter flight her sister had quietly arranged. Her phone buzzed once an hour before boarding. A text from Theo, landed in Atlanta, long week ahead, miss you both, kiss Wren for me. She didn't answer. She popped the SIM card out of her phone with her thumbnail and dropped it into a trash can near the terminal entrance. As the small plane lifted off the runway, the engine noise swallowing the sound of her own unsteady exhale, she looked down at her sleeping daughter and felt something that wasn't quite triumph and wasn't quite grief. Something more like relief, the specific relief of finally setting down a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying with both hands for months. Theo wasn't walking into a tragedy. He was walking into a consequence. Back in the driveway of the house that no longer belonged to him, Theo sat in his car until the sun was fully up and the street had started to wake. He watched his neighbor, Mrs. Calloway, no relation, an elderly woman with a habit of watering her azaleas at dawn, peer at the broken French doors with open curiosity. He couldn't bear to face her, couldn't bear the question forming on her face, so he threw the car into reverse and peeled out of the driveway with a violence that startled even him. He needed cash. He needed a hotel. He needed, more than anything, to feel like a man still in control of something. He drove to the branch of First Piedmont Bank where he'd had an account since college, walked in still wearing yesterday's wrinkled shirt, and approached a teller he vaguely recognized, a young woman named Priya who'd processed his direct deposits for 2 years. "Rough morning, Mr. Hartley?" she asked, glancing at his disheveled state with polite concern. "Something like that. I need to make a withdrawal from the joint savings." She typed, frowned, typed again. "I'm showing a hold on this account, sir. The primary holder initiated a freeze pending family court review yesterday afternoon." "That's not possible. It's a joint account. I'm the primary earner." "The balance is also at zero, Mr. Hartley." She said it gently, the way you'd deliver bad medical news. There was a transfer of approximately $81,000 out to an external trust account yesterday morning. He felt the blood drain out of his face. "Check the business account. Hartley Consulting Group." "I'm not able to access that account, sir. You're listed as an authorized signer, not the primary owner. It's registered under the Callaway Hartley Family Trust." She paused, checking again. "That account shows the same freeze. The trust. Imogen's father had set it up when they married, a gesture Theo had always understood as old money paranoia, and had never bothered to interrogate. Signing whatever papers were placed in front of him, while drinking his father-in-law's bourbon and talking about football, he had assumed, without ever quite confirming it, that he controlled it. He had been a guest in his own financial life for 4 years and hadn't noticed. "My personal checking?" he asked, his voice smaller, now. Priya checked. $412, sir. $412. He couldn't afford a week at a Hampton Inn on that, let alone the life he'd built his entire identity around. He walked out of the bank in a daze, sat in his car in the parking lot and dialed the one person he was certain would help him. Brielle picked up on the second ring, her voice warm and unsuspecting. "Hey you, back already? I thought the conference ran through Thursday." "There was no conference, Brielle. I need somewhere to stay. Imogen knows everything. The house is gone, the accounts are frozen, I have nothing." There was a long pause on the line, the kind of silence that has weight to it. "Wait, the accounts are frozen? Like all of them?" "Yes, I need to come stay with you for a few days, just until I get this sorted with a lawyer, Theo." Her voice had lost its warmth entirely, gone brisk and businesslike in a way he'd never heard from her before. "I don't really do this. The lawyers, the frozen accounts, the ex-wife drama. That's not really my situation to be in, you know? I bought you a Cartier bracelet 2 weeks ago, and I said thank you," she said sharp now. "Look, I have to go, my roommate's landlord is doing an inspection today and it's a whole thing. Call me when you've got this figured out." The line clicked dead before he could respond. He sat in the parking lot of First Piedmont Bank holding a phone that suddenly felt very heavy, staring at his own reflection in the rearview mirror. Bloodshot eyes, 2 days of stubble, a collar still faintly smelling of someone else's perfume, and understood, with a clarity that arrived far too late to matter, that he had built an entire second life on a foundation that could not bear any weight at all. He drove to his office instead, because it was the only place left where his name still meant something. Hartley Consulting occupied the 4th floor of a glass building downtown, a space he'd designed the layout for himself, down to the brushed steel letters of his name on the lobby directory. He parked in his reserved spot, smoothed his shirt as best he could, and walked in trying to project the calm authority of a man weathering a minor inconvenience, rather than a man whose entire life had detonated 12 hours earlier. The receptionist, a young woman named Devon, who usually greeted him with an easy smile, didn't look up from her screen. "Mr. Hartley, there are some people waiting for you in the conference room. They said it was urgent." Inside, 2 men in gray suits stood beside the long table, manila folders fanned out in front of them, neither one smiling. "Theo Hartley?" the older one asked. "We're with the firm's outside counsel. We need to discuss some irregularities the board flagged in last quarter's client billing. Specifically, 3 invoices for consulting hours that appear to correspond with dates you were documented as being elsewhere." Theo felt the floor tilt beneath him for the second time that day. He hadn't even considered that Imogen, methodical to the last, might have quietly flagged his expense reports to the board months ago, planting one more domino that wouldn't fall until exactly the moment she chose. By the end of that week, Theo Hartley had no house, no marriage, no daughter he was permitted to see without supervised visitation, a checking account with $400 in it, and a leave of absence from his own consulting firm, pending an internal review he suspected he would not survive. He moved into a long-stay motel off the interstate, the kind with a flickering vacancy sign and a vending machine that ate quarters, and spent his nights staring at the water-stained ceiling, trying to understand how a woman he'd never once thought of as dangerous had taken apart his entire life without raising her voice a single time. Imogen, meanwhile, was 400 miles away, in a small coastal town in South Carolina. Her grandmother had left her in a will Theo had never bothered to ask about. The cottage was modest. 3 bedrooms, a porch that faced the marsh, a kitchen with cabinets that needed repainting. But it was hers, fully hers. In a way nothing in her marriage had ever quite felt like it belonged to her. She spent the first few weeks simply breathing. She'd forgotten, somewhere in the last 2 years of managing Theo's moods, and his schedule, and his slow drift toward a life that didn't include her. What it felt like to wake up without bracing for something. Wren grew fat and easy in the salt air, sleeping in longer stretches, smiling at the ceiling fan, utterly unaware of the war that had been fought and won on her behalf before she was old enough to understand any of it. It was on a Tuesday morning in late September, 6 weeks after the house sold, that Imogen drove into town for groceries and ran into a man named Desmond Ferris at the farmer's market, a marine biologist who'd moved down from Wilmington the year before to take a position at the research station up the coast. He was unbothered and unhurried in a way that felt almost foreign to her after years of Theo's restless ambition, and when he asked, simply if she'd like to get coffee sometime, no agenda behind it, no calculation she could detect, she found herself saying yes before she'd had time to overthink it. She wasn't looking for anything. She told herself that repeatedly over the following weeks, even as the coffee became dinner, became long walks along the marsh with Wren strapped to her chest, while Desmond pointed out herons and explained tidal patterns, with the quiet enthusiasm of a man who loved his work and had never needed to perform that love for anyone. He never asked about Theo beyond the bare facts she volunteered. He never made her feel like a cautionary tale or a project to be fixed. He simply showed up consistently in a way that began, slowly, to recalibrate what she understood a partner could be. Theo, for his part, did not disappear quietly. 6 months after the divorce was finalized swiftly and entirely in Imogen's favor, the postnuptial agreement holding exactly as ironclad as Walter Greaves had promised, Theo resurfaced. He'd lost his position at the consulting firm after the board's internal review confirmed the billing irregularities Imogen had flagged months earlier, evidence of expense fraud, serious enough that 2 clients quietly pulled their contracts rather than be associated with the fallout. He'd burned through what remained of his savings on a lawyer, who ultimately couldn't unwind a contract Theo himself had signed without reading. Brielle had stopped answering his calls entirely sometime around the 3rd month, when it became clear there was no version of Theo Hartley left that came with money attached. He showed up at the cottage one evening in early spring, uninvited, his car a different one now, older, a dent in the rear panel, standing at the edge of the porch light with the particular desperation of a man who has run out of every other option. "Imogen, please, I know I don't deserve, I just want to see her. I want to see Wren." Imogen stood in the doorway, Wren on her hip, nearly a year old now and reaching curiously toward the porch light. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't slam the door, she simply looked at him for a long moment, taking in everything he'd become, the same arrogance, just hollowed out now, stripped of the resources that had once let it pass for charm. "You can petition the court for supervised visitation, the same as before," she said evenly. "That hasn't changed, and it won't, no matter how many times you show up here unannounced. But you don't get to walk back into this life just because the other one fell apart, Theo. You don't get to choose when the consequences are finished." She stepped back inside and closed the door, not with anger but with the quiet, settled finality of someone who had already done all her grieving months ago, and had nothing left to perform for him. From the kitchen window she watched his taillights disappear down the dirt road toward the highway. Desmond came up behind her a few minutes later, wrapping an arm around her waist without a word, and she let herself lean back into it, into the particular relief of a life that had finally stopped requiring her to brace for impact. She thought, sometimes, about the version of herself who had found that receipt in the pocket of a gray suit jacket, and felt the floor shift beneath her, without letting it show on her face. She didn't regret the patience it had taken, the months of smiling through dinners she could barely stomach, the careful, surgical precision of taking apart a life that had been built, in no small part, on the assumption that she would never notice and never act even if she did. What people never understood about quiet women, she thought, watching Wren reach up to grab a fistful of Desmond's shirt, was that the silence was never submission. It was preparation. And by the time anyone heard from her again, The only thing left to say was that it was already finished.